Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the Cave of Mystery. Now I'll turn my monitors back down. How y'all doing? It's Stratosphere Lounge number 17. That's utterly unbelievable to me. It really is 17. 17 times I've just sat here and gone off my meds, and people are still here. That's an amazing thing. So we got again, as we get closer and closer and closer to the election season. Let me try that again. As we get closer and closer and closer to the election season, it gets more and more to talk about. And as always, we've gotten tremendous comments from our Facebook page, and I don't know what to say, honestly, about the quality of the comments we always get, but I never worry about finding stuff to talk about. So let's get started, shall we? Always run out of time on this thing, and I think we'll be able to do at least an hour and a half to 7:30, maybe go to 8, depends on how things feel. So, everybody ready? Here we go. I want to start with a question that came sort of in the middle of the comments thing, but I certainly wanted to start by talking about this, and it's from Sal Valuto, who says, please compare some of last night's best moments at the Alfred Smith event with the best moments from the Dean Martin celebrity roasts. Thanks. Just got a notice saying, what, no tech issues? No, it's a different show. I'm not the same guy. They kidnapped Bill Whittle, took his engineering staff away. We've had good bandwidth issues for a while now, 3 or 4 in a row. We used to have to just break the show into 5 pieces. Anyway, I did want to start by talking about the Alfred Smith thing. I don't know if you've seen it. It's up on my Facebook page, getting a lot of traction, where Mitt Romney is doing a white tie event and speaking to a Catholic group. President Obama's there, and Chris Matthews is just behind him. Katie Couric is directly behind him. And Mitt Romney gives one of the best delivered monologues I've ever heard, ever. He is insanely good. And I'm talking to you now as a person who makes a living doing public speaking. His delivery, his timing was flawless. And I am utterly convinced that if the American people, rather than watching debate number 3, I think what Mitt Romney ought to do is just buy 10 minutes of time with whatever money he has left and run those 10 minutes, because he will be the president if the American people see that Mitt Romney. It's unbelievable how good he is. He's relaxed. He's in command. He's confident. He's modest. He's self-deprecating. He's on point. He's just sharp enough to make the point, but kind enough to not. So I'm not going to go into a lot of time spending describing to you what Mitt Romney looks like. If you haven't seen it, do it. It's on my Facebook page. It's also in a lot of other places, but do it. You won't believe it. I actually watched that late last night. Somebody had said, oh, he's really good. And I thought, I'll watch it. And I have to tell you, I've been pretty strong against Romney during the primaries because I thought he was a big liberal, and I thought he was, there's 2 people on the stage now for the running for president in these debates. Both of them have brought sort of this national health care thing and all that stuff. And when Mitt became the nominee, I thought, well, maybe we're getting another, squishy kind of a rhino, and what we really need is a real conservative. And that's where I was at the point where Mitt got the mathematical nomination prior to the actual convention. And then from the point where he won it mathematically, everything he's done since then made me like Mitt Romney better and better and better and better and better and better. All across the board, everything he does. Picking Paul Ryan I thought was fantastic. I'm really happy to hear that. Everybody's saying, well, will he repeal Obamacare? And Mitt is on record 500 times now saying it's the first thing he'll do. I thought his response to the Obamacare question in terms of it being what he thought was right for Massachusetts, never intended to be a federal program, is he shading it? I don't know, but it works for me. I don't have a problem with federalism. I don't have a problem with people living in if you want to live in a state where you have super high taxes and free health care for tomato plants, then by all means. That's the beauty of this country. It's really should be 50 little laboratories, and we find out what works and what doesn't. So that actually worked for me. And I have liked him better and better and better and better and better. But up until watching him on this Al Smith thing, I never really loved Romney. But I have to tell you, we don't have the same sort of messiah complex that the left has. We have principles and we have representatives of our principles, and that's what we believe in. And that's why I always try to squash as quickly as possible any kind of time I'll hear anything or I'll say something or maybe I'll make a comment or people say, gee, disappointed in you, Bill. And I want to say, please unlike me now, because I don't, it's not about me. It's never been about me. None of the things that I do or say are about me. It's much, much, much bigger than me. I'm occasionally I'm always grateful, but I'm occasionally useful in conveying a message that's much older and much bigger than me. And so I never liked this kind of personality thing. And I'm saying all of that simply to say that watching Romney at the Al Smith thing, I just loved him. I thought that's what I want. That's what I want in a president. I already agreed enough with his policies, but in terms of this is a better way to put it. I like his policies well enough. I know that he loves America. I know that he's a good man. Loving America and being a good man are very important to me because everybody talks about the president's record or the president's, his track record coming in and so on. These are all interesting things, but all of the stuff about a president or a presidential candidate's pre-existing record and stuff really goes to one thing and one thing only, right? And that's character. Because no one can predict what's going to come to you during that job. No one can predict what that 3 a.m. call is going to be. We can't predict it. I can't predict what Romney's response will be. Romney can't predict what Romney's response will be. So all we have is character, and that's all we need. I like this man's character better and better and better and better and better. The more I see of Mitt Romney, the better I like him. And self-deprecation is something that is not only a sign, in my opinion, of some intelligence, but it's also a sign of real character. And Obama, of course, was self-deprecating because you're expected to be self-deprecating, but I don't ever really get the sense that he believes it. And when you hear Obama talk about the first debate, he had a lot of great jokes there. He had to joke, and they were teleprompter jokes, right? Again, pre-written jokes anyway. And of course, so was Romney's. There's some speculation that Romney's speech was written by Dennis Miller. But it comes down to character. And Mitt Romney strikes me as a guy who has got a fundamental humility about him, a fundamental core to his character that allows him to joke with himself. And I think that is one of the most important things I'm looking for in a president, only because here's the thing. I just had a thought that may be worthwhile. 17 episodes, sooner or later something's going to happen. Here's a thought. If you have when you look at the reaction of Katie Couric and Chris Matthews, notably, among the press people in there, they're laughing hysterically at Mitt Romney. And I've always felt that the main problem with the mainstream media is that since their entire lives consist of cocktail parties in New York City, usually with European intellectuals and other snooty people from around the world, that whether they admit it or not, I think what the elitist left and the skyscraper left, the limousine liberals like Katie Couric and Chris Matthews, I think what they're actually looking for in a president, honestly, when you get right down to it, I think what they're really looking for is a guy who's good at a cocktail party. I think they like the idea of a guy that they don't have to apologize for when their snooty French film critics come over, because these limousine liberals have a fundamental inferiority complex. They never feel like they're as good as the Europeans. Like, this is so hard to figure out, my God. Honestly, how pathetic is that? But I genuinely believe it. I genuinely believe that they have an issue with their worth. And so they like to be seen with people that make them feel good associating with. And I think that comes down to being slick at a cocktail party. That's why they like John Kerry over George Bush. George Bush struck them as very boorish and poorly spoken and not very bright. And intellectuals from Europe would come over and say, this man's an idiot. Why do you vote for him? I didn't vote for him. I'm trying to get him out of office. They like Barack Obama because they thought Barack Obama was a smooth, erudite, well-spoken, clever guy who they could be proud of at a cocktail party. And watching Katie Couric and Chris Matthews, watching them watch Romney, led me to believe that they could think that this is a president that they wouldn't have to be embarrassed about. And I thought I made my bones defending George Bush for 8 years or 7 of the 8 years with the Iraq War, so I have a high opinion of George Bush. But I thought when Mitt Romney was asked how he's different from Bush, I thought he gave a substantive answer, and certainly Bush is different from Reagan, and I saw more of Reagan in Romney than I've seen in any candidate since Romney. And that is an utter surprise for me, because when Romney got the nomination, we thought, well, we're going to have to make do with Romney. He's no Reagan. And he certainly is not a Reagan yet. And I don't want anybody to think that just because he had a great night reading jokes, I think he's the next Reagan. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we'll have to see. But I think he has the potential to be. He has the potential to be. There's that fundamental decency and kindness in Romney that I'm seeing that I saw in Reagan. That happy warrior quality was really on display at that Al Smith thing. So there's all of that. And there's something else I want to talk about too about that Al Smith thing. That's why I wanted to lead with it, because I think it's very, very important. Watching that Al Smith video was the first time I felt good about this country in 3 years. It was the first time I actually felt good, because not only were the two men obviously being at least genial, right? Genial. They're being genial and respectful and joking and what's the word I'm looking for? Teasing with each other. That was good. And seeing the people who I am ideologically at war with, the warriors in the actual warriors that I'm at war with, Chris Matthews and Katie Couric, two people I despise. Seeing them laughing and smiling and admiring Romney and applauding for him softened my opinion of them quite a lot. But even bigger than that is the idea that I don't know. I don't care if it's a uniquely American thing or not. I like it. I like the idea that two people who could be locked in mortal combat with each other for the future of the country could sit in the same room and laugh at each other's jokes and laugh at each other's jokes about themselves. I'm proud of a country where both people can get up on the same thing and be okay with it. Boom! There you go. That's for the people out there commenting. Boom! And Romney was getting those one-liners off. Boom! And another one. Some people wanted to hear the boom again from last week, and who am I to disappoint my audience? But honestly, truthfully, watching them up there just made me feel good. It made me proud. It made me relax a little bit. It made me feel like this isn't the end of the world, and I just really liked it. And with all that said, it was a pleasure watching the President of the United States of America and Barack Obama on the same stage joking with each other. So that was always that. I think it was a remarkable, remarkable, remarkable thing. And I'll close again by saying, if the American people get to see that 10 minutes of Mitt Romney, it's over. And I thought his close, he was very funny, but I thought his close was actually sweet. We don't carry the burden of disliking each other. I believe he doesn't. I don't believe that Barack Obama doesn't carry that burden. I believe Barack Obama can't stand Mitt Romney, but I don't think Mitt Romney hates Barack Obama. And I don't think Mitt Romney really hates anybody. Mitt Romney is yet another data point in my personal experience. I'm not trying to make a sale for anybody. This is just me and my personal experience, but he is yet another exclamation point on my trajectory graph of how absolutely astonishingly good Mormons are. I went up to do a couple of universities. It was either 2009, 2010. I think it was 2010. They invited me up to speak to Southern Utah University and Utah Valley University, something like that. And both those experience and another experience where I went up to as a guest of some Mormons up to Boise, I just can't tell you how impressed I am with these people. I got a fairly decent inside tour of Salt Lake City, and I'll just tell you what I told them. After a couple hours of being shown around the welfare square where they're canning food for people and anybody who walks in looking for a job or is out, not just down on their luck, they're homeless. They'll take them there and they'll give them a job. They don't give them money, they give them a job. And they give them job training, and they let them take home a paycheck at the end of their first day, and they could automate some of the food preservation things more, but that would mean fewer jobs for people, so they actually don't. And I was astonished. And then you start hearing about some of their backup plans in terms of all their records that they keep on computers and how those are all backed up because they have a big thing about genealogy. They believe that they have to pray for their ancestors and they can get their ancestors out of out of hell. At least that's my understanding. And I realized that Salt Lake City and the Mormon Church certainly has 5 years worth of food and fuel and all this stuff set aside, that they're ready for economic collapse, they're ready for an asteroid impact, they're ready for the second coming of Jesus, they're ready. I said to the people that were giving me the tour, I said, you guys are, it's kind of like I'm visiting the elves or the Vulcans or something. I mean, you guys just have all this stuff iced. And I remember thinking very, very clearly when I was finished with that Mormon welfare center tour, welfare square tour, I remember thinking crystal clear that isn't this what the federal government's supposed to be? Out of the way, prepared for disasters, not only not spending all the money, but actually saving some money and putting some aside for a rainy day. Isn't that what they're supposed to be? Isn't that what the government's supposed to be? And there was I took a picture of it. It's still on my iPhone, and it was basically, it was an inscription inside the building, just outside of the grain elevators. These grain elevators are the center of Welfare Square. I think it's called Welfare Square in Salt Lake City, and it's a landmark in Salt Lake City, and they're very prominent. And inside there was a quote from one of the Mormon bishops, and the quote was something very close to, the grain silo is there to remind us against the potential coming of a day when money cannot buy food. Okay. I read that and I went, oh man, yeah. Isn't that what you want? Don't you want that? I want that. I want the government to be doing nothing more and nothing less than getting out of the way, making sure the laws are enforced, making sure that we're all protected, that the streets are paved, and that if something bad happens, they can bring massive amounts of aid and fix things, but not get in the way. I just loved him. I'll have a sip of a tasty beverage. Coca-Cola, ladies and gentlemen. That'll be $5,000. Yeah, anyway, I just wanted to close on that. Mitt Romney's I think maybe one of his funniest jokes of the night. It's not one of the sharpest, certainly, but it's the one that made me like him the best on the Al Smith thing. He says, many people are wondering how we prepare for the debates. Well, I can only tell you what I do. First of all, before the debate, I very conscientiously refrain from drinking alcohol for 65 years. And, he said, I don't normally get invited to events like this, and when I do, it's usually because they need a designated driver. It's just sweet. It's so refreshing to see in this day and age. I mean, think about this. To see in this day and age, Bill Clinton and the sleaze of Bill Clinton and all this other stuff, but to see a man who is actually mocking himself for the fact that he's never tasted alcohol in his life. Isn't that kind of what a moral people deserve for a president? I mean, he's smarter than just electric whips. He's a graduate of both Harvard Business and Harvard Law with a 3.95 average. Smartest man I've ever seen in politics. And he's also, that's it. That's what it is about Mitt Romney. He's the smartest man I've ever seen in politics, and he's the nicest man I've ever seen in politics. That's a combination that would be good for this country. I think I'm really starting to get behind this guy. And the final thing I'll say before I move on, because we have to have a little history in here or else there's no Stratosphere Lounge without the history. I'll just say this final thing. One of my favorite stories from the Civil War, and I just love the Civil War, is when, during the first invasion of the North, when Robert E. Lee went into the North for the first time in the 1862 campaign, which culminated with the draw at Antietam, at Sharpsburg, he was going through a town of Frederick, Maryland, not Fredericksburg, where there would be a battle next year, but he was going through Frederick, and it was the first real kind of unabashedly northern town that he had taken his army through, because most of the war had been fought in the South, obviously. So Robert E. Lee is taking the Confederate army through Frederick, and they're marching through the town. And there was a story that was reported in the diary of a young woman. She was probably 17, 18 years old. And when she's got her face pressed up against the glass as this enemy army comes marching through her town, and finally she sees Robert E. Lee ride by. And Robert E. Lee was described as the handsomest man in all of Christendom, with this lion-like head and just this, halo of white hair, and on a white horse, or gray horse, anyway, traveler. And so this young Union sympathizer looked at Robert E. Lee go by, and she said, oh, how I wish he were ours. And I can honestly tell you, for the first time in my personal life, because when Ronald Reagan was running and when Ronald Reagan was president, I didn't like Ronald Reagan because I passionately believed in things I knew nothing about. I was just a stupid kid. This is the first time in my life watching him at the Al Smith thing where I actually have had a guy who's on my team that I actually really, really am proud of. And those of you who've been following me know that I didn't come into this match this way. So anyway, yeah, Mitt really impressed me quite a lot, and he's impressing me every time I see him. So go Mitt. One of the 2 remaining firewalls before the election will be my argument for why people are voting either Libertarian or Ron Paul or whatever, or not voting, have to get out there and vote. We'll come to that later because there's a question that's got something to do with that. So anyway, that's the Al Smith thing. Awesome. It's on my Facebook page. Watch it if you haven't. Let's move on. Michael Kraft wants to know if Romney was elected on a Tea Party platform and failed to follow through and became basically more of the same rhino bollocks, that's a great word, that it would be very likely be the end of the Republican Party since the conservative base would move to a third-party candidate in 2014 and 16. Thoughts? I'm so glad we got that question. Because when I do this firewall about coming out to vote, if you're a Libertarian or a Ron Paulian or just a Republican who thinks he's a rhino, I'll give it to you in condensed form here, and we'll try to make the case a little bit better later. I understand the vote on principle, and I especially understand the idea that the Republican Party is not a conservative party in most cases, and Mitt Romney is probably the most liberal conservative we've run in a long, long time. And I can understand why people would say, I'm simply not going to vote for him. It's more of the same. And I can understand why people would say he invented Obamacare. I'm not going to vote for him, period. I'm going to vote for Gary Johnson, the Libertarian Party, or I'm going to vote for Ron Paul because I want to make a statement of principle. And if there's anybody on this earth who appreciates a statement of principle and living up to your own morality and your own standards, it's me. You don't have to convince me on how this works. You don't have to try to explain to me the importance of living up to your principles. I get it. I get it. And I'm not about to say, and so here comes the argument telling you to abandon your principles. It's not what I'm going to try and tell you at all. I'm going to tell you why I am going to vote enthusiastically for Mitt Romney and the consequences of this vote that I'm going to cast for Mitt Romney. It is true that Mitt Romney may be a big state liberal, but he is less of a big state liberal than Barack Obama. Let me preface this again. There is no question. If we're conservatives, we pride ourselves on looking at the reality of the human condition and the reality on the ground, and not we wish what was true, but what is actually true. That's the essence of conservatism. And libertarians scored even higher on this in terms of being the people most likely to have a cold-hearted, clear-eyed, rational, sane view of the world. So let's start from this place. There is no rational, sane person out there, no one, believes that either Gary Johnson or Ron Paul are going to be the next president of the United States. There's only one of two people. One of two people is going to be the next president. It's either going to be Mitt Romney or Barack Obama, and no rational person denies this. So the question becomes, if you vote for Mitt Romney or Gary Johnson, is your principle vote advancing your principles, or is it hurting your principles? Because I'm not trying to talk you out of your principles. I respect principles. I try to live my life by principles. I don't think anybody else who is rational and sane can say that while Mitt Romney is also, in many ways, a big state person, and that big state is bad, which I agree with, there's no question he's less of a big state person than Barack Obama. There's no question that he's far better at managing a fiscal debt situation, which is the only existential threat to this country. Iran getting a nuke is not the end of this country. Al-Qaeda is not the end of this country. China, military ascendancy is not the end of this country. There's only one thing that can actually destroy this country and have us sitting around burning tires, eating rats on sticks. And that is a worldwide economic collapse brought about by this debt bomb. And if you agree with that assessment, because I don't think there's any question about it, then you have to say that not only is Mitt Romney less bad than Barack Obama, but in many ways Mitt Romney becomes almost an ideal candidate for for this. And I just saw out of the corner of my eye, what do I think about Mitt's position on assault rifle bans and all this? I want to cut away all of this stuff because, in my opinion, there is one existential threat to the United States of America, one existential threat to this country, and that is this debt crisis. Everybody knows it can't continue. Everybody knows that what the end game will be a hyperinflation, first an inflationary period, and then as the inflation continues, the interest rates will go up, which will mean that there will be more money owed, which means more and more of our taxes have to go to pay off just the interest on the debt, which means a super inflationary crisis, which means very likely a situation. We haven't seen it in Greece yet, only because Greece is bailed out by the EU, and the EU is bailed out by the American taxpayer. We sent them trillions of dollars. This is going to end sooner or later, right? It's going to end sooner or later. So the question becomes, if this is the single existential threat to America, I'm going to concern myself with this. If this were 1939 or 1941, my vote would be going to whoever I thought could best defeat Germany and Japan, and I wouldn't care if they, that's all I would care about. So if you look at it that way, then you have to ask yourself if it is possible to conceive of a better ticket than Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan in the real world. Because when Mitt Romney selected Paul Ryan, he doubled down on this idea of the debt being the primary issue in the country. It's doubling down on it. Ryan was known for the Ryan Plan. And the Ryan Plan is the only sensible, sane, doable, achievable solution to this problem, and it's actually rather simple. Mitt Romney is precisely the kind of guy you would want if you take Mitt Romney's name off the ticket. If you do agree that the economic crisis and the debt crisis is the primary structural problem with America today, then what you want is a man who has gone in there and looked at failing economic institutions, failing financial institutions, cut away the deadwood, buffed up the things that work, and built a plan for recovery. I don't know how you'd improve on this right now. So that's the first part of the argument. The second part of the argument I want to make is a much more important argument than that, if you can believe it or not. Because we have seen, since the ascension of Barack Obama, so much voter fraud. If Andrew Breitbart had not lived, forget about him dying, if Andrew Breitbart had not lived, then Acorn would be counting our votes. Acorn is a criminal enterprise designed to steal elections. Michelle Bachmann gave a talk earlier today. I wasn't there, but Jeremy was, and she said there is no question that the Democrats stole 3 Senate seats in 2008, and one of them was Al Franken's. Stole it. And stealing these Senate seats allowed them to pass this Obamacare abomination. So the second point I would make to people who have a hard time voting for Mitt Romney is simply this. If Barack Obama is elected, and if you don't vote for Mitt Romney, that is ensuring that Barack Obama will be elected, then I am utterly convinced that they will corrupt the electoral process to the degree where we may not ever be able to win an election ever, 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 ever again. If they have 4 more years to do what they're doing now, where we as conservatives understand, we know there's going to be massive voter fraud. It's not even up for discussion anymore. We know we have to win by 3 points or more because they'll probably get a point or two just through fraud. That's how bad things are. If these people have 4 more years without the fear of re-election, there's no question. We may never have another. We will have elections because the American people will rise up, but we may never have another fair election again. So there's that. So the final part of the argument I would make is this. I would ask you personally, for whatever influence I have, to do what I'm going to vote for Mitt Romney enthusiastically, but you don't have to vote for him enthusiastically at all. You don't even have to vote for him. You have to go out and vote against Barack Obama by the only person that can defeat Barack Obama. And if you vote for Gary Johnson or Ron Paul, that is a vote for somebody other than the only person that can defeat Barack Obama. He needs to be defeated. And if you look at this and take the long view, believe me, coming off of John McCain and kind of a squishy conservative like Mitt Romney, I know everybody gets tired of being told to wait next time, wait. But if our worst fears are true and Mitt Romney runs as a liberal, then we will run a conservative primary candidate in 2016. We'll primary him, and if it means splitting the party and losing that election, then that's what it means. And if there's a viable conservative party in 4 years, I will be voting for them, if it's viable. But no one believes that Gary Johnson or Ron Paul is going to get more than 1 or 2%. No one believes that. That's just not going to happen. 1 or 2%. 1 or 2% may be enough to cost Mitt Romney the election, but it's not enough to win Gary Johnson's, not even enough of a vote to make people aware of a third-party presence. I mean, Ross Perot, what did he get? 17%, 20%, something like that? And he would have gotten more if he hadn't dropped out, and I was supporting Ron Paul. So, look, it really does come down to looking at the equation on the ground, right? It is going to be Mitt Romney or Barack Obama. There's no question about that. And so if you want to talk about an appeal to your values, I would simply ask you this. That is the inevitable result of the first Wednesday in November. It will be one of those two people. And if you have principles, and if those principles include things like a love of constitutional limits on government, if you love liberty, if you love all of these things, you have to ask yourself, which one of these two inevitabilities will be less bad for what you believe? It's a no-brainer for me. I don't know what Barack Obama will do when he doesn't have to be reelected. He says he's going to be more flexible to the Russians. He's going to be more flexible with everybody. And again, an election is where you take a blue chip and a red chip and a blue chip and a red chip and a blue chip and a red chip, and you just keep stacking these chips. And when you run out of blue chips, if there's more red chips left, the red chips win, vice versa. If you don't put a chip on that pile, and they do, you're contributing to their victory. And in a country where we outnumber liberals by 2-1, if you think about it, really, we should never, ever, ever, ever lose another election again, ever. Republicans and conservatives would never lose another election ever. Best estimates are anywhere between 30 and 40 million eligible conservatives do not vote. Significant portions of the evangelical community, 30%, 40%, do not vote. Significant percentages of the National Rifle Association do not vote, presumably because most of them don't want to register to vote because they're worried about giving the government their address. I think the government's got your address. And if you want to protect gun rights, the way to do it is not to disengage from the political system and wait until they come after you with a tank to get your guns. The way to win your gun rights and keep them, you don't have to win them, you've got them. You've got them at birth. You had your gun rights the second you were born as an American. So it's not like I don't understand this. But the way you can stop somebody stealing your rifle with a tank is to get out there every single election and vote for the people that want to allow you to keep your guns and every other thing in the world. So the capsule discussion is this. I would ask you to vote for Mitt Romney to whatever degree of influence I have, not as a violation of your principles, only because he will be less offensive to your principles than the guy who will be president if you don't vote for Mitt Romney. And furthermore, if we can stop this hemorrhaging now, and if we can stop this erosion of our liberties now, and if it is a Republican president, even if he's a Republican in name only, we do have influence over him. We have no influence over Barack Obama whatsoever, but we have influence over a Republican president. And the very least thing that we can insist on, this is certainly the banner I'm going to carry if we win this election from day one, is we need to get our electoral system back into a non-fraudulent situation. It means voter ID laws. It means a paper ballot that can be recounted. It doesn't mean putting electronic signals into a machine paid for by George Soros and designed by the guys that, put Harry Reid in office in Nevada. So all of these things make it pretty clear to me. And I think I'm not going to say the time for principle is next time around. I think my principles tell me I want to save this country. And if we don't save this country, I don't know who will. I don't know what there will be after this. And I don't want to, when I think about the destruction that Barack Obama's caused, when this guy was elected, I said, this is going to be bad. But I'm just going to ask you, did any of you think it would be as bad as it is? Did anybody think this would be this awful? Did you ever think you'd see things like you've seen in the United States, where the president of the United States basically says, I'm going to arrest a filmmaker for exercising his free speech, his right to free speech in order to placate 7th century murdering savages half a world away? Did anybody ever in their wildest dreams imagine that? Did anybody in their wildest dreams imagine that the president of the United States of America would say on camera to the leader of the Russians, our arch enemies in the world, people who are diametrically opposed to everything we believe in, I will give you our defensive shield that we've spent billions of dollars and 2 decades on. I'm just going to hand it to you if you just don't give me any trouble between now and then. That is the textbook definition of treason, and we all know it. And if you're going to sit home and let this guy get reelected, then we have nobody to blame but you. Because I'm voting for the guy who's going to try and stop that. The liberals are voting for their guy because they believe in these kind of things. They believe in this appeasement. They believe in this kind of treason. They believe in socialism. They're doing what they're supposed to do. I don't think you get to sit this one out. I just don't get you. I just don't think you get to sit it out. And if you want to vote and make a principled stand as the country's going off a cliff, well, then you can stand on the train as it goes over and give your salute to yourself. But the fact of the matter is, if you really want to defend what you believe in, you may have to pick the lesser of two evils, because the lesser of two evils is the lesser of two evils. And if you say things like, well, Romney is, Barack Obama is accelerating us off a cliff and Romney's not going to stop the car or turn it around. He's just going to do it more slowly. Okay, maybe you're right. I happen to think maybe he will stop it and turn it around, but maybe you're right. If he's going to go off the cliff more slowly than the man who's accelerating, doesn't that buy us more time? Does that buy us more time to get... Look, the Tea Party is how old? The Tea Party is 3 years old now. We've had one election cycle where we've had Tea Party candidates. We put 30, 40 Tea Party candidates into Congress. We're going to put more of them in this year. Isn't it true that every single year that goes by, we get to put more and more of our genuine grassroots conservative into Congress? We have more and more actual conservatives like Paul Ryan, who voted for some things that we don't particularly like. I thought TARP was necessary. I thought the stimulus wasn't. But isn't it true that if you're buying yourself time, you're buying yourself time? Isn't that argument, at least that, worth something to you? And I'm here to tell you, I'll give you one final thing to think about, and that is this. If you know anything about these two people personally, about their personal character, you know that Mitt Romney is a fundamentally good guy who was raised to love America. He's a loving father. He had a loving father. He doesn't have a chip on his shoulder. He's given a lot of his money to charity. I know some objectivists think that's a crime, but he's a good man. He's a good man who loves America. And Barack Obama is not a good man, and he doesn't love America. And frankly, I would probably consider voting for a good man who loved America, whose policies were further away from my view, than a bad man that didn't love America. Of course, that's almost impossible to say because my policies are based on loving America. Listen, the deal, I think I can sum this up in one sentence. Jeremy Boring first put this into words back a year ago when we were in the primaries. Here's the deal. We'll vote for you, Mitt, once. All right? We're going to vote for you once. You're going to get one vote, Mitt, on credit. We're going to take your word for it. If you govern as a big state liberal, we will primary you in 2016 with an actual conservative, or maybe even an actual conservative party, because at least by then, 4 years of Barack Obama will be behind us. We will have some decent people trying to regain the electoral system in this country. The economy will recover. That's the time to make adjustments. This is not the time to cut off your nose to spite your face. Anyway, if that hasn't moved you, I don't know what will. You're not going to get my condemnation for your stand on the principles, but you will have to deal with the consequences of the fact that if Mitt Romney loses this election by the margin of votes that went to Gary Johnson or Ron Paul, if that costs us the election, you will be responsible for the next 4 years of Barack Obama. That's how I see it. That's how I see it. You're free to disagree with me. Moving on. Pat Bigos wants to know, how do you debate teenage leftists and keep calm? Flight or invisibility? How does one keep sane in a solid blue state? Thanks for all you do, Mr. Whittle. Thank you, Pat. I appreciate that. Another sip of delicious beverage. I had two experiences just a few months ago, not even a few months ago, just very recently, a few weeks ago. By coincidence, they came sorry, I just spilled something here. They came very close together chronologically, and I had been dreading them for a while. I had a speaking engagement in Toronto, which is a very liberal town, and then I had a speaking engagement at Oberlin, which is a very, very, very liberal college. And I was dreading them both because I was expecting to be heckled and yelled at and screamed at and people standing up and chanting and all that other stuff, and I have very little patience of that. So I was also expecting that there was a reasonable chance that I would get a pie in the face like Ann Coulter, and I decided and said to everybody here, put some bail money together, because frankly, if you think I'm going to just simply sit there and have somebody run up on stage and throw a pie in my face, you're out of your mind. Somebody comes up to me with a pie, they're going down. We're going down together. I'm going to punch that guy as hard as I can. I'm not going to just sit there and take it. So get the bail money. But none of those things happen. And so I will tell you, in terms of dealing with liberals and dealing with a very hostile argument, I'll tell you two things that I did, and one of them surprised me, surprised myself. I'll tell you the small one first. In both cases, in Toronto and especially in Oberlin, and especially during the Q&A, the first thing I did was take Andrew Breitbart's advice and never, ever, ever, ever concede the moral high ground on anything because they don't deserve it. And it's all we do. It's all we do is concede the moral high ground. We've been having a little bit of discussion in the comment section here about guns. Let's take the gun argument. What you see conservatives do or Republicans do is they'll take, like, for example, the hunting argument. They'll say, well, you'll hear conservatives arguing for the Second Amendment. I'm making a case now of why you never grant these people the moral high ground. So what you'll hear many conservatives do, many politicians do, is when it's gotten better, but they used to say, well, you really can't ban guns because there are hunters, and hunters have a right, don't they? I mean, hunter's a tradition, and we've got hunting in this country, and it's a long tradition. It goes back hundreds of years. We should be able to keep our guns because we're hunting. It's a stupid argument. They would like to get all of your guns, including your hunting rifles, but we know that there's two things they're looking for. They're looking for assault weapons, and they're looking for handguns. And so when you say, well, we should be able to hunt, what you're really doing is you're conceding them the moral high ground. You're basically saying, yeah, it's true that guns kill people and stuff, and we feel really bad about that, but, we want to be able to keep our rifles so we can go hunt deer. Well, no, you can't do that. This is the mistake that we make all the time. You never, ever, ever grant them the moral high ground. When I would argue people on a podium about gun rights, they'd say, well, I had one person actually say this for me. So I suppose you want to keep your guns because you think your AR-15 is good for hunting deer. I said, my AR-15 is not particularly good for hunting deer. I have an AR-15 so I can kill people with. I have a handgun to kill people with at close range, and I have an AR-15 to kill people with at long range. And they're silenced by this. They're stunned. What? What did you just say? Did you say what I thought? Yes, of course I said what you thought I did. Let's not be children here. Of course my .45 caliber automatic is designed to kill people at close range, and my AR-15 is designed to keep people from getting into handgun range. That's why I have a 3x scope on it. I don't want them to get close enough so that I have to use my my 45, right? And you instantly, when you make that argument, you instantly rock people on their heels because they are never used to you having the conviction of your own beliefs. They're never used to hearing you say that you actually believe in what you believe in, because the reason I have weapons is not to protect myself from deer. And if I was a hunter, and I'm not, I don't have any problem with hunters, but I'm not. And if I was a hunter, I'd have a 30-06 with a scope on it or something else like that, some bolt-action rifle for one good, clean shot with a lot of power behind it and bring the animal down, hopefully get him the first time. But I'm not. I've got the guns in LA because I want to be able to defend myself and the people that I care about from bodily harm. And so when you give up the moral high ground in the beginning, like you'll often hear people do, even in the NRA, you're basically saying they're right. And I will never give them that, ever. So when we talk about guns, we're going to start with me talking about the reason I have my guns is to kill people. Human beings that are coming to hurt me, because my life is as valuable as theirs is, and it's much more valuable to me, as are the lives of my loved ones to me. And the short answer to your giant moral question, sir, is I'm not breaking into his house, right? If he doesn't want to get shot, maybe he shouldn't break into mine. I don't break into his house because I feel like if I do, he's got a right to shoot me. Who started this chain of events that results with him lying on the ground dead and not me? He did. He's the one that came at me with a weapon or a knife, or he's the guy who mugged me. I didn't mug him. And as we say, and I'm not going to get into the whole gun rights thing here because it's just a whole nother day, but as we say, better to be tried by 12 men than carried by 6. And that's exactly right. So again, you never grant them the high ground. So the question was, how do you argue with leftists, especially young leftists, and stay calm? The first thing you do is you never give them the high ground. So I was at Oberlin, and I'd mentioned that I was opposed to affirmative action. And some smug kind of 19-year-old kid basically said, why, you say you're opposed to affirmative action. Why are you opposed to affirmative action? And I said, because it's racism. And I don't like racism. I think racism is ugly, and I think people that support racist policies are evil. That got his attention. And I'll tell you something, folks. Once that happened, it was over at that point. He never recovered from that, because every time he would start to defend affirmative action, I would get into why it is a racist policy that is designed to degrade black people. And he's not ready for that. He's ready for me to, again, cede the moral high ground and talk about, well, affirmative action is really a quota system and it keeps white kids out of college and all this other stuff. No. It's racist. Racism is evil. I'm against racism, and I don't like racist and evil people like you. I'm supposed to be the racist, see? I'm supposed to be the evil racist, but I'm not. He's the evil racist. I never give up the moral high ground, ever, on anything, ever. And when I argue with people who talk about socialism, and they talk about how evil capitalism is, and socialism's great, and communism's wonderful, the first thing I'll say before I talk about anything, I don't get into why capitalism produces more goods, and so I'll get into all that later. The first thing I turn to them is I say, first of all, you're going to have to explain to me how a person, any person, can sleep at night knowing that they are advocating a policy that's killed 150 million people. That's the entire population of England, the entire population of France, and probably throw Ireland. Every single person in those three countries line up past you and you shoot them in the back of the head. You shoot them in the back of the head. That's 150 million people. And then we can have a discussion about whether it works or not. You are going to have to own the carnage and the failure and the blood. You're going to have to own it before we have this conversation. And man, it's fabulous, right? It's fabulous because they are so used to using things like communism and where everybody shares and affirmative action because we care for black people and gun rights because we don't like seeing people murdered. The only reason they talk this way is so that they can tell each other how much better they are than everybody else. It is unearned moral and intellectual superiority, and if you give it to them, you are walking into their battlefield. You are walking into the ambush that they've set for you. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And anytime I run into any argument anywhere, I'll do one off the top of my head. Let's take global warming. Okay, why are you opposed to measures to slow down global warming? If it turns out that global warming isn't true, how have we harmed anybody? You hear this every now and then. I'll say, listen, if what you're saying is we should do these because if you're right and global warming's happening, we save the planet, and if I'm right, global warming isn't happening, then what's the harm? I'll tell you what the harm is. If I take every single dollar I make, money I would have spent on my child's education or food or medicine or anything, helping poor people, whatever. If I took every single dollar that we made that could be applied to good and used it to build a wall around a lake, and this wall had to be 1,000 feet high and the wall cost $100 billion trillion in order to keep out a monster that lives in the lake, and then you tell me that, gee, well, maybe there isn't a monster, then where have those resources gone? And what could we have done with those resources? How many lives could we have saved? And how much a better life would everybody else have if the monster didn't live in the lake? So this argument that, gee, there's no harm if you just go ahead and do these things because if we're right, great. If not, I've heard this argument. It was making the rounds a couple years ago. It's utter nonsense. People are going to die. And people are going to get sick and die and starve because you're spending billions or trillions of dollars on something that may or may not be there. So this idea that what's the harm is you're ruining the economy of the world in exchange for something that may or may not be there. Now, you get down to now that you've deprived them of their moral advantage, right? You've deprived them of thinking better than you are. And you say, I'm more concerned with the welfare of people and the planet. I'm more concerned than you are because it's important for me to get this right. Now you can start arguing data. And when you start arguing data, as somebody just pointed out in the comment section, my close personal friend, Bert Rutan, has taken a look at the global warming data and done an engineer's analysis of it. You should know something about Bert Rutan. For most of his productive career, he lived in Mojave, California, which is a desert. And Bert Rutan lived in a pyramid built into and under the desert, and it was the greenest house in the country for many years. He had an electric car. Now, Bert didn't have an electric car and a greenhouse because he thought about global warming, because this was before global warming was ever promoted as a theory. Bert did it because he's an engineer. Bert thought it would be cool to use my brain to design something that uses less electricity because that way I don't have to pay as much for it. He wasn't making a fortune in those early days, He's never really made a fortune. And he was living on plans for long easies and very easies. He was just barely making ends meet. He did it because it was interesting to him. So he didn't have an agenda. He didn't do it just to show everybody how much smarter he is than everybody. Bert Rutan's smarter than everybody in the world. Bert Rutan didn't have to prove anything to anybody. He did it because he's an engineer. It was a challenge to him. The point I'm trying to make is Bert Rutan had a reputation as being super green because his house used so little energy and his electric car and all this other stuff. So Bert Rutan is inclined to look at data. In fact, inclined to look at data is the biggest understatement, and this is probably the stupidest thing I've said in a long time. Burt Rutan personally lives and dies based on whether he can interpret data, and certainly his best friends in the world will live or die based on whether or not he can interpret data. Somebody just, Benjamin Ari de Kraker said you had to drop Burt's name. I didn't drop it. Somebody else mentioned him, so there's Burt. So here's what happened with Burt. So Burt came along and took a look at the global warming data. He didn't go out and get his own data. He didn't reinterpret satellite data. He didn't skew things. He didn't do anything. He looked at how the global warming community was interpreting data. And after he was finished, he put together the most magnificent destruction of this theory I've ever seen. It takes about an hour or maybe even two. It's a PowerPoint demonstration. It's online somewhere. If you Google Burt Rutan global warming, he's got it online. And it's a PowerPoint thing. He gave me the short form, and the short form personally delivered to me by Burt Rutan at his house took about half an hour. And I understand the science behind global warming, I would say better than the average layman. And it's just devastating. And the great thing about it is they would challenge Burt, and they would say, well, what kind of a climate scientist are you? What are your climate science credentials? And Burt would say, I'm not a climate scientist. On the contrary, I have no particular climate science information at all. I'm an engineer. I'm using your data. That's just damning, isn't it? This is your data. I'm not bringing new data to this. This is your data. I'm analyzing your data verbatim, and your data doesn't make any sense. It does not support the conclusions you're drawing. Okay. So we were talking about the moral high ground and arguing with liberals. And once you deny them the moral high ground, they're really in trouble. I don't know if I've told this story before. I probably have. By the time we get into 17 of these Stratosphere Lounge, probably told all these stories. But one of my favorites, I was up in the lounge just before I took the job at PJTV in 2008. It was one of my last few weeks at the old place, and was a room full of liberal producers, and I was the only conservative there. And what happened was they hired a new producer, and I'd never met her before, a 27-year-old woman, and everybody knew I was the conservative, and they gave my edit bay a large. They used to walk around the building to not have to walk past my bay in case they heard something that might challenge their worldview. And I'm in the lounge making some tea in the morning, and this woman who I'd never met before comes in and says, you must be that conservative I've heard about. Isn't that sweet? And I said, yes, hi, I'm Bill. And she said, well, I suppose you just don't care about protecting the environment, do you? And I said, what environment do you want to protect? And she said, what? I said, what environment do you want to protect? The Earth has been much hotter than it is now. It's been much cooler than it is now. There's been a lot more carbon dioxide, 8, 9 times more carbon dioxide. There's been a lot less carbon dioxide. Sea levels have been higher, sea levels have been lower. So when you say you want to protect the environment, what environment do you want to protect? Do you want to protect the 2008 environment? Do you want to protect the 1975 environment, the 1402 environment? Do you want to protect the 600 BC environment, the 5 million BC environment? Which environment do you want to protect? Because it's a heartbeat. It's constantly changing. It always has. So if you want to protect the environment, put a pin in it and stop this beating heart. Where do you want to do it? And that was the end of the argument. Because what she was wanting me to say, what she expected I would say, is that I don't give a damn about the environment, it's not happening, or I don't care if it's happening as long as I get to drive my big car, all this other stuff. They don't know how to handle life when you take away their moral high ground. It's a joy. So the two parts to that answer, how do I debate teenage liberals or other liberals and stay calm, is first of all, I never give them the moral high ground. Second, that's the first thing. And the second thing that I learned from Toronto and applied in Oberlin was something that I was not ready for at all. At all. I just literally surprised myself because I got interviewed. I did a TV interview in the morning with Sun TV, and then I did a print interview with the Toronto Sun. Then I did another interview on Sun TV that night. But the print interview with the Toronto Sun was done by a very liberal reporter. I could tell she was a liberal. And she had never seen a conservative before. She basically came out and said it. And this is the part that surprised me, because I had thought that my primary mission in going up there was to present people with an unvarnished view of American conservatism as I understood it, namely one without the spin. These are our foundational principles. These are what we believe in, and this is it. You've never heard it straight before. You've never heard it without spin before. So I thought my mission was to go up and second time I've said that, maybe prevent them from, from going on with their sad lives. But second time I said that, yeah, but go up and present basically the argument as best I could. And that's what I thought my mission would be. But then when I got there and I started talking with this person, and her cameraman came in, her photographer, and he was very, very low. He jumped, the photographer jumped into the interview, and she was getting really quite annoyed because this guy was coming at me with all this other stuff. And I realized that actually the best thing that I could do was to present the arguments, but the main thing I could do, because this is how these people think, was the main thing I had to do was humanize the arguments. I had to humanize them. I had to make them, and not even the arguments really, I had to humanize myself. The fundamental thing I had to do, I realized, was get these people to see me as a person who was not consumed with rage and hate for anybody, especially poor people or black people. And this kind of goes to the combination of where you can apply that sort of humanity and that same sort of not ceding the moral high ground, where you can talk about the history of the Republican Party as the party that's done nothing but help black people from the get-go. And that only when the Democrats started giving away entitlements in order to harvest the black plantation vote did the black community really fall apart. And that we are opposed to things like affirmative action, not because we don't like black people. We're opposed to affirmative action because we like people, that we don't see them as black people. We don't see them as less than white people. We don't see them as inherently inferior, not able to get the same score as people. We're not naive enough to say that there aren't some obstacles that might have been there and maybe still even might be there. So I would say to them, you oppose affirmative action? Yes, I do, completely. And before I'd finish that sentence, I'd say, now, I'm 100% in favor of things like the United Negro College Fund, which is a voluntary, non-coercive deal that provides money for people from disadvantaged families that might help them get to college. But that doesn't say they have to have a lower bar to get in. It does say that there may be disadvantaged black kids out there who may not have the economic opportunities that maybe some white kids do. I'm not sure I buy this whole thing anyway, but again, how can you argue with it? If somebody were to put together the United, left-handed ginger Palestinian college fund, who could have a problem with that? So you immediately let them know that it's not that you're a bad person. And when they realize that you're not a bad person, something really remarkable happens. They actually, it's not even that they listen. You can just sort of see the cogs start to turn. It's almost like, and this is how it works, right? This is how political correctness works. You don't have to listen to Bill Whittle because Bill Whittle's a racist, or Bill Whittle's a homophobe, or Bill Whittle's a misogynist. You don't have to listen to him. Just don't even go. But when they go, and the first thing I do is not lay all these statistics and barrage them down with arguments. First thing I do is humanize myself and tell my own story. Then they have to start listening to you. And they were trying to talk about, well, you don't want this same kid in Oberlin said, well, you just don't understand the black experience in America. And before I could answer, a person in the front row turned around and goes, and you do? You're a 19-year-old white kid paying $56,000 a year in tuition. You understand the black experience in America? And that was a lovely thing to hear, and it's certainly nice when somebody rides on a horse to your defense, because it's always nice when that happens, I guess. But as soon as that guy had finished saying that, I said, listen, buddy, I know where you're coming from with this. You see me down here in a suit looking like $1 million bucks. I mean, obviously. And you think I'm a rich guy, and you think that I'm a person of privilege and I don't know what any of this means. So I'm going to tell you now a little personal story, but before I tell you the story, I want to tell you one thing, because this is very, very important before I tell the story. The fact that I have been poor for a lot of my life doesn't make my argument any truer. If I was, in fact, a rich kid and had nothing but luxury and nothing but opportunity spread before me, what I said a moment ago is still true. It doesn't become more true or less true as I rise or fall on your moral scale. But just because I know how people like you think, let me just tell you about some of my life. Is this rich white guy who's talking about the poor. I'll just tell you a little bit of it if you haven't heard it before. When I was in college, I was I was kind of estranged from my dad, and he was not in great financial shape at the time anyway. And I never let him know how bad things were. But I spent probably 3, 4, 5 years. There's poor, and then there's broke, and then there's no one will take your bad checks broke, because if it comes down to writing a bad check or eating that day and sending out for pizza, I'm here to tell you this is a no-brainer. For 2 or 3 years in college, I was so broke that we would occasionally, I remember very clearly a friend of mine named Josh Braun who said, "How much money have you got?" I said, "Probably about $1.30 something." And he said, "I got $3.60, and my friend Fritz had $1. And we pooled our money, and that was $6. And we went to Wubs, and we got 3 big cheeseburgers and water. We wanted fries and we wanted Coke. We couldn't afford it. But I remember 3 big cheeseburgers. But I will tell you this seminal story that happened to me. This is absolutely true, and you're going to have a hard time believing it because it sounds bigger than true. And it was bigger than true when it happened to me. I'm 6'1", and right now I lost about 10 pounds on purpose. I really just wanted to lose it for the camera. Right now I'm 6'1", I weigh about 169, 170, 171, right in there. That's right where I want to be, by the way. 168 is the perfect weight for my height. But when I was in college, I was still 6'1", and I weighed 119 pounds, which is 50 pounds lighter than I am now. That's a walking skeleton, 119 pounds at 6'1". And I was that thin because I didn't have any money. And I told you about pooling resources to buy food. We used to go to the supermarket, and we'd buy something we got to call bone burgers. These were hamburger patties that came frozen in a box of 12, and when you pulled them out and put them on the grill, they weren't red or even pink. They were gray. They were gray hamburger patties, and the reason we called them bone burgers was because the primary ingredient in them wasn't ground beef; it was bone meal. But they filled the hole up. Anyway, here's my story. So one night, I woke up in my bedroom as a starving student, genuinely starving student, 119 pounds, and I was so hungry I couldn't sleep. I was just ravenous, and there was no food in the house, and I didn't have a penny. And when I say a penny, I mean I didn't have a penny. So I got on my bike, and which I was about to sell, and I drove around Gainesville, Florida, and it was a cold night too. Get cold in Gainesville. Drove around, and I went to all the fast food places about 2, 3 in the morning, and everything was closed down. And I went to all the drive-through fast food places, looking on the ground underneath the drive-through, hoping somebody dropped some coins or something. And no. And then I went to vending machines, nothing. Newspaper things, nothing. So finally, at about 3 a.m., I went on campus, rode my bike on campus off of University Avenue where the fast food places were, and I went to what used to, I think it's been changed, it used to be called CPA, General Purpose Building A. It's a giant brick structure. It's a big, ugly building, big, giant classroom structure. And then in between, almost like a tunnel cut through the bottom of GPA, it's a square walkway, a little breezeway, and 20, 30 yards long, and lined with vending machines on both sides, Coke machines and snack machines and stuff. And I thought, I'll see if there's any change that somebody might have missed. Now, you're dealing with students. We're not prone to miss these kind of things, right? So I pull my bike into this breezeway in GPA, and you're just going to have to take my word for this, because I understand better than anybody how unbelievable this is, because I couldn't believe it either. But I got my bike inside this breezeway, and sitting in the mathematical middle of that breezeway, exactly between the two sides and exactly halfway down on the ground, was a $1 bill that was folded in quarters. It was just sitting there. $1. And I just couldn't believe it. It was $1 lying on the ground. And I picked it up, and I got on my bike, and I hauled ass over to Krispy Kreme Donuts, which is open 24/7, and I bought 4 apple-filled donuts. The guy gave me the break on the tax. I think they were like 23 cents each or something. I owed him like 4 cents. Yeah, I have another one. I have 4 apple-filled donuts, and I ate them all right on the spot, and I don't think I've ever tasted anything better than those 4 apple-filled donuts at Krispy Kreme at 3 in the morning. And that actually happened to me. There were decades of my life where I had to basically hyperventilate over whether or not I was going to pay my rent or my electricity, or mostly the rent. Although you pay your electricity before the rent. If you've never been in that kind of boat, you know that you can put off paying the rent, that you can, put off a landlord for a while, a month or two even. And once the electricity goes off, you're living like an absolute animal. So, I know what it's like to sit in a room and have your landlord call you on an old-fashioned answering machine and not pick it up. I know what it's like to sit in a room with the windows and the blinds closed and have the landlord bash on the door and not answer the door. I know what it's like. And this shouldn't inoculate me against these people, because the arguments that I make are not based on my background, and they're not based on anything other than what seems to me to be right. And I could be a $30 million trust fund kid, and it wouldn't be any more true or less true, but to the liberal mind, it becomes a lot more true. And I guess it's not totally unreasonable, is it? When you can explain to somebody that you've actually been there and you've come to this place, they may not agree with you, but they can at least understand that you're not unaware of what the reality is, and that you kind of factor this in. So, that's what I do. The two things I try to do when I argue with liberals are I never grant them the moral high ground, and I try to humanize me as a person in order to get them past their knee-jerk reaction that all of us are evil. And when you can humanize yourself, and humor is useful, not just useful, humor is essential, kind of comes back to the Al Smith thing. I actually liked Barack Obama better than I had in almost 3 years, watching him laugh and joke about himself, joke about Romney, and laugh at jokes at himself. I don't think he had anything like Romney's genuine sense of humor or self-deprecation, but seeing Katie Couric laughing at Romney, and especially Chris Matthews laughing out loud at Romney, with Romney, not at Romney, with Romney. Blame everything on Pope John Paul II. I mean, that's cathartic to me. It made me feel like we should have more of this. Anyway, that's how I argue with liberals and stay sane in a solid blue state. Thanks for that, Pat Bigos. This one is fantastic. It's a great question, and I didn't do any mental preparation on this. I sat on the corner for an hour and a half and didn't think of the white elephant. So Adam Crockett wants to know, Bill, if you could travel back in time and witness any 15-minute time span in history without a chance of affecting it, what would it be? And I think there's one about, did I get one about any three individuals? I'll get to that later, hopefully. Wow. I think if I could watch any 15 minutes in history, it would come, I can't give you one, but it would come down to several. And I can probably narrow it down to two or three. I think my number one choice would have been I'd like to have been in an observation plane and watched the 15 minutes when the battle turned at Midway. I would like to have been flying over the Imperial Japanese fleet when the American dive bombers and torpedo bombers finally got through and they lost three carriers in about that amount of time. That, to me, is the greatest single 15 minutes in history. If I could have watched the Battle of Midway, or, Ensign Gay, right? He was I think he was in Torpedo Gate, an ensign named Gay. And he was shot down in one of the earlier wave attacks, and I don't know if his backseater was killed or what. I think he was. And Gay is floating in a little one-man raft, and he is literally in the middle of the Japanese fricking fleet. There are aircraft carriers around him on all four sides, and all these bombers and planes and everything. And he sits there. It's called the best seat in the war. And Gay watched 3 Japanese aircraft carriers go down in 15 minutes. That must have been quite a sight. I think I'd like to have spent 15 minutes watching the final minutes of Pickett's charge, but if I had a Civil War 15 minutes, I would actually, and there's no question about it, I would like to have been there to see Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's speech and counterattack on Little Round Top on the second day at Battle of Gettysburg. I would like to have been there to hear him say those words. If you haven't seen it, you need to rent Gettysburg and watch Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, a man who I admire more than just about anybody. Just watch him do it. Watch him do it. Watch him out of ammunition, tell the men under his command, lads, history, God only allows men to have this kind of chance once in a century. That's a profound thing. I would like to have seen that. Those are the first two that kind of come to mind. You know what? I'm going to take the other one now too. And if there's a third one, it doesn't leap out to me. I would like to have been there in Dealey Plaza during the Kennedy assassination, only because I used to believe it was a conspiracy. I'm now 100% convinced as I can be of anything, that it was Lee Harvey Oswald, and it's only because of a book called Case Closed by Gerald Posner. Case Closed is a great example. If you read Case Closed and you still believe that there was a conspiracy to murder John F. Kennedy, then you're beyond redemption, in my opinion. I've never heard or read a single more devastating application of reason, research, and logic and science to an argument. Case Closed, one of the best books I've ever read in my life. And I was coming from a kind of a conspiracy thing. I kind of thought, oh, definitely. So I would like to have seen it just because I know it's true. That I really wouldn't even put that on the top 5. Anyway, those are the 3 things. And I'm going to butt this up against something I had kept for later, and I'm, as usual, running really long here. Joshua Schweitzer wants to know, if you could sit down over a meal with any 3 individuals, alive or deceased, who would they be? They would be Mark Twain, Abraham Lincoln, and Ronald Reagan. And that would be a dinner conversation. I just can't even imagine how awesome that would be. But if I had 2 choices, it would be Abraham Lincoln and Mark Twain. And if I had 1 choice, it would be Mark Twain. In fact, I almost answered if I had 3 choices, it would be Mark Twain 3 times. I have such an affinity for him, a huge affinity for Lincoln. Not so much of a reverence for Reagan, because I saw Reagan with my own eyes. What I mostly want to do with Ronald Reagan is apologize. I do that all the time, by the way. I'm often speaking out at the Reagan Library or at events at the Reagan Library, and I would have, every single time I go there, I go up by myself to the little, area where he's interred, and I just kind of sit there and bow my head and apologize for all the crap I said about him and how stupid I was. But I'd like to have him at the table. Winston Churchill would be a very high on that list. Somebody mentions Neil Armstrong in the comments section. I don't have to tell you how I feel about Neil Armstrong, but I don't get the feeling he's a great dinner conversationalist. But Lincoln, Twain, and Reagan. And Lincoln, because if you read the Civil War trilogy by Shelby Foote, you only begin to grasp the human toll. I honestly don't think that history has ever beaten a man the way that Lincoln was beaten. And there's a tremendous thing. I don't know if I have it on. I put it up on Eject almost a decade ago now. There's a side-by-side comparison of Lincoln taken, a picture of him taken in 1861 and a picture taken in 1864, beginning of the war, the end of the war. And Abraham Lincoln looks like he's aged 40 years. 8 years of the presidency adds time to a person. George Bush looks 100 years older than he did when he went in, and it's true for everybody. But Lincoln looked like he'd had that life. Remember that movie Life Force, where the aliens suck the life force out of you like electric bolts come out of your mouth, kind of thing? Lincoln looked like the before and after pictures of that. He just had the stress and the worry killed him. And you would hear stories from his personal bodyguards about how they would walk the halls in the White House at night, and they'd just hear this moaning at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, this moaning and this wailing, and the sense of a man who was maybe dying of dysentery, a person who was so weak he couldn't fight back and just struggling and banging against the walls. And night after night after night after night, it was Lincoln in his sleep looking at these caskets and these dismembered bodies coming by. It destroyed him. And I would like to talk to Lincoln only to let him know that it was worth it. And I'd like to talk to the Wright brothers that way. I often have a fantasy about bringing the Wright brothers back just to show them, put them under the runway when a 747 goes over, and take them for a little ride or something, but just show them, or show them the Thunderbirds, I think the Wright brothers get a kick out of that. But let's talk about Twain. I came to Twain pretty late, although I have to say that I did an improv. I had a class called Oral Interpretation. It's a preliminary requirement for Acting 1. And I did a Twain monologue when I was probably 17, 18, 19, and it was hilarious. And I came to Twain pretty late. I only started reading him 5, 6, 7 years ago. And then I read The Innocents Abroad, and after I read The Innocents Abroad, I read every single word. I've read all of his letters. I've read all of his short stories. There's a couple of novels I haven't read yet. I'm saving them. But the first thing I'll say about Mark Twain is I don't think of him as Mark Twain. I think of him as my friend Sam. I feel like he's my friend. I feel like I know him as well as I know many people in my life, and I feel like he's a buddy of mine, and I feel like I could sit down and have a dinner with him. I had a short story idea about sending a message back in time to Twain that I liked very much. And not only is he the funniest man I've ever read, but it's a runaway. Twain's wit comes out of the ground in such a way that it's, you know what it's like? It's like stepping on a rake. You're looking at a beautiful landscape of something, and then you're just walking along, and then boom, it just bam in the nose, and it's always coming from the same place, and it's always just so perfect. Much of it is sharp, but not all of it is, and much of it is some of it is the most brilliant, self-deprecating stuff ever. He did a short story called "My Trip to Niagara." And he was talking about taking the staircase down underneath the waterfall and then walking on a swaying rope bridge. And he says, and I was gripping onto that rope with both hands, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to. And that kind of thing is just fantastic. It's fantastic. But the humanity of the guy, and I'm not talking about things like Huckleberry Finn, although Huck Finn is the great moral. It's the great moral decision of the age where Huck Finn decides he's going to go to hell and save his friend. But things like Innocents Abroad and the quality of the humor, the Americanism of the humor, the wisdom, the tragedy, the anger. He's just so human, and he didn't hold anything back. That's why I feel like he's my friend. I just feel like he's my friend, and I miss him. And I talk to him all the time. Believe it or not, I know this is going to sound really weird. I don't talk to him like he's sitting here next to me, but I think about him all the time, and I think about him like he was a friend of mine that just passed away. I'll give you a little example. In Innocents Abroad, he talks about this quite a lot. He talks about getting a shave. You have to understand that getting a shave today is not the same as getting a shave in 1867. In 1867, he goes to Europe and the Mideast, and he talks about getting shaved in France and getting shaved in Italy and how appalling it is. And he says something about how he was sitting in this chair, and the guy with the first stroke of his razor just lifted him out of his chair, and he said, the barber, when he was finished shaving him, he said, "Would you like a haircut?" And Mark Twain said, "No, I've already been skinned alive. I don't want to be scalped on top of it." So he talks all the time about how hard it is for him to shave, and he had a very thick beard, and how every single shave he got in Europe was torture. And his friends, another great story, he says, "I'm not going to be shaved by these people anymore. I'm just not." And so his three friends call for a shave. An Italian barber, a Parisian barber comes by, and they're sitting in the chair, and they're going, "This is the greatest shave I've ever had in my life," one of his friends says. And then the other guy gets in the chair, and the other friend says, "I'm sorry, I think I actually fell asleep under this man's touch. This man's a magician." And then the third friend says, "This is without question the finest shave I've ever had in my life." So Twain says, "All right, fine, shave me too." So he gets in the chair, and this guy shaves him, and sure enough, he pulls the skin off of his face, and then his other three friends are laughing, and they're wiping the blood off their face, and it's like, he talked about shaving all the time. So to give you an example of how deep Mark Twain has penetrated my consciousness, I have a 3-bladed razor, like Mach 3 or something, and I'm at the store, and I'm buying razor blades, and I see this 5-bladed razor. F it, 3 blades are good, I'll get the 5. And then it had a little vibrator. It had a button on it. You put a little AAA battery in there, and you press a button, and the blades vibrate. And it was like $2 more than the one that didn't vibrate. So I said, okay, you know what? This is how absurd life is, right? I've got a 5-bladed vibrating razor that is styled like it just came off of the Starship Enterprise Next Generation. I mean, there's this little piece of space hardware, and I'm going to throw another $2 at it just so I could say I did it. And I thought the whole thing was stupid and just dumb and needless and so on, until I got out of the shower and I turned on that little buzzing thing, and I started shaving with a vibrating razor, and I said, "This is fantastic. This is fantastic, man. This is great. You know who'd dig this? You know who'd really love this? Sam would just love this razor." So that's yeah. If I had a dinner with 3 people in history, I would forego Reagan, and I'd even forego Lincoln if I could have dinner with Mark Twain 3 times. Anyway, that's the answer to that question. Had 3 questions on the same thing here. What are we doing on time here? We're a minute 23 into this. We'll go another couple questions or so. Nathan Spear said, is there a war on men and masculinity? And if so, what does it look like and how does it manifest itself? And if not, why the big hype about it in various media? And then Isaac Tiemann said, in her blog on PJ Media, Dr. Helen Smith has been arguing that our society is increasingly rigged against men. Do you think there's merit to this assertion? And then Brandon Wong said, what are your opinions of the men's rights movement and feminism, respectively? I was lucky enough, I don't know, I guess most of you saw the Facebook page because that's where you put the questions. I had dinner last night with Glenn Reynolds and Dr. Helen, and I talked to Glenn quite a lot, and I was afraid I wouldn't get a chance to talk to Helen at all, but I got to talk to her in the last 15, 20 minutes. What a remarkable woman. Beautiful and lovely and well-spoken and elegant and smart as a whip. Glenn's just Instapundit. He's a kept man. He's a gigolo. I mean, she's the brains of the operation without question. And she was talking about this, and I said, yeah, I did a segment with Clavin, and I just said, I don't want to hear about the war on men. I think the whole idea of complaining and whining and bitching about the war on men is unmanly. I think the thing to do is just man up and ignore it. And she said, yeah, I saw you say that on the show. But my question is, would you say that about your fundamental freedoms, your fundamental rights? I said, no. She said, you'd fight for those, wouldn't you? I said, yeah. She said, well, this is a fundamental rights and freedom thing. It's got legal consequences. And to just say ignore it and man up I'm not sure that's the right policy. And she shamed me into changing my mind and shamed me into changing my mind pretty much immediately. So, yes, there is a war on men and masculinity. And you don't have to go any further than look at the advertising that you see every day. Every man on an ad is either a child or an idiot child. They're sitting on the couch and they're playing with something stupid, or they're breaking something, or they're couch potatoing, or they're whatever, and they're eating their munchies, and they're talking at football, or they're whatever, or they're falling off of a ladder, or they're mowing the roses or something. And the mom is there, the wife is there, and she's balancing the checkbook, and she's throwing a bemused look at the idiot man-child she's married, and or the kids come home and dad is clueless and mom has the great suggestion about how to perk up and every time you see an ad for insurance, it's always the guy who's like, what's insurance? And it's that, and it's a lot less subtle in many cases. I know that I did this afterburner called Old School about my time at Oberlin and the feminist movement there, and I remember thinking how old it is, how tired. And if you read Helen's work about the war on men, you realize that men's graduation rates in high school and college especially are way below women. They're taking economic hits that are way out of line with the ones that women are taking. And then you see Barack Obama after the second debate out on the road talking about binders and how it's a war on women, and he wants to live in a world where his daughters get paid the same as a man. And I thought, that's a profound argument to be making in 1963, but I don't know if I buy that at all anymore. I don't think the danger is with little girls anymore. I think the danger is with little boys. I think little boys are told that they have to be girls. They have to behave like little kids, little girls. They have to share, and they have to talk, and they have to be nice, and they can't have guns, or they can't play rough, or they can't play tag because somebody will be hurt. Somebody's feelings going to be hurt if somebody's it. And if they're going to play baseball, they can't keep score because that's harmful to their self-esteem, and they can't run too fast, and they can't jump, and they can't do anything. And so everything I'm about to say and have said is predicated on my belief that little boys and little girls are different biologically, psychologically, temperamentally, emotionally, certainly physically, different. And if you don't believe that, then none of this will make sense to you. But if you don't believe that, if you believe that men and women are biologically equal, then you might be in for a surprise if you were to look at something like track and field results. Somebody pointed out to me a year or two ago that if you look at the women's record-setting Olympic records in, let's say, the 100-yard dash, if you look at the time of the fastest woman alive, you will find that virtually every single college in America has men that can run that fast or faster, and almost all the high schools do. That's a heck of a thing. And this is not to say that makes men superior to women, but to say that they're not different is, look, why is there, if men and women are physically the same, and that it's just this, that as real feminists would want you to believe, then it's not a question about talking about women's sports. You have to say, well, if that's the case, why even have women's sports? Because if there wasn't a separate category in the Olympics for men and women, there would be no women in the Olympics. There just wouldn't be. So you might find one outlier or something, but this is my point, right? There are fundamental differences, and there are profound differences in temperament. And when they try to isolate these differences as much as possible, what they find is if they put a bunch of boys who've been raised without masculine, coaching, and girls who've been raised without feminine coaching, and they try to wash out as many of these things as possible, if they put them in a room as very young infants, a couple months old, what they find is that the girls all tend to cluster together and start talking to each other, and as they get older, this gets more and more pronounced, and the boys tend to wander off to the edges and start exploring the corners. And that's not to say that I believe that you have to sit in the circle and look at other women. If you're a woman, you want to go exploring, you do whatever you want to. I believe in nothing but individual freedom. And to say that there are inclinations and strong proclivities is not to say that there aren't exceptions to those rules, and that as a person who believes in individual freedom, I believe women should be able to do any job they are qualified for. Any job they're qualified for. If they can outperform male fighter pilots, then they deserve to be in those cockpits. And if they can carry equal weights up ladders, they should be firemen. And some of them can. But when you start talking about lowering standards in order to allow women to do jobs that are traditionally dominated by men, certainly jobs that require great physical strength, like being a fireman is a good example, then you have to ask yourself, if it turns out that women cannot deadlift the same amount of weight as men, some of them can, but if it turns out that they can't, and you start lowering the standards for firemen in order to have women be able to carry less weight, you have to ask yourself if you are not dooming certain people to die because a woman who can't carry 250 pounds is coming down a ladder with a man where a man who would have been if she hadn't gotten that job. So this whole thing gets very complicated. And one of the amazing things to me about biology is how even-handed the goodies seem to be distributed. In other words, this is off of memory, but my understanding is that men tend to have better vision than women. Women tend to have better hearing than men. Men tend to be more resistant to cold, I think it is. Women tend to be more resistant to heat. Maybe it's vice versa. Men have greater physical strength. Women tend to have more physical endurance, and so on and so on and so on. You find that all of these things are distributed. Men, without question, as a general rule, deal much better with spatial orientation in their head. That's why they're able to read maps better than women. They have much more linear thought processes, which is one of the great, there's a great video I may have already posted on my Facebook page about a guy standing on a stage in front of two podiums, and there's a male head on one and a woman's head on the other, and he talks about the difference between men and women think and talk, and he said that the male mind is a series of boxes like on a tackle box, and each one of these boxes is independent, and each one of them has something in it. So one of them's got a job, one's got salary, one's got his wife, one's got his kids, one's got football, one's got all these things, and men will open a drawer, and they'll take that thing out, and they'll look at that and think about that for a while, then they'll put it back in, and they'll close the drawer, and then they'll open another drawer, and this guy says, men's heads are full of boxes, and none of the two boxes touch. And then he goes on to say, to a huge laugh from the women, and ladies, the box that men go to most often has nothing in it. And they think, ha 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 ha, men are so stupid, they don't think about anything. It's not that at all. It's just that the male mind has more of a tendency to be able to simply remove itself from the moment. And that is a source of tremendous strength, kind of getting to this war on male thing. I know certainly in my personal experience that when women are upset, they want to talk about it. And when men get upset, they don't want to talk about it. Because women need the cathartic... The flip side of this argument, by the way, is that this guy said, now women's minds are like a ball of wire. And all of these wires are touching all of the other wires at the same time. So if she says, honey, we're going over to your friend's house tonight for dinner, she's concerned about things like, well, maybe I shouldn't wear my best dress because Jim has been out of work for a while and I want to look like we're making more money than he is. And of course that may affect his wife who also did this to me, but then again I have to factor in all this other stuff, and she's got this relationship with the kid. The kid's sick, and that has also to be this just ball of wire where everything touches everything else. There's a great line from the greatest man, the funniest comedian who ever lived. He's my all-time favorite, Brian Regan. And he talks about how he went to play golf with a guy who had gotten divorced from his wife. And the two couples used to be very close, and Brian Regan goes out to play golf with his friend, and he comes back from golf, and Brian Regan's wife says, so how's he dealing with the breakup from Susie? Is he dating anybody else? And Brian Regan goes, I don't know. You don't know? Didn't you spend the afternoon with him? Yeah. You spent 3 hours with your friend Jim, and you don't know whether he's seeing anybody else or whether he's dating anybody? You've been divorced for 6 weeks now? Never came up? Really? What do you know about your best friend? And Regan says, I know he's got a new driver. That's how it works. And I don't like being dragged through emotional things. And when I'm upset, I want to go play a video game, because if I play a video game, I'm in the game. I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. So anyway, this clarity, not even clarity really so much as focus, linearity, is a tremendous strength. And that's why I believe men are designed to be different from women, because not everything touches everything else. I think evolutionarily that is what you want in an emergency. You want a person who can open up the immediate box and not have it touch all the other boxes and do what needs to be done as unemotionally as possible. I really believe that's what it's about. And that's why I think that certainly in LA, where the war on women is most successful, in places like Santa Monica, the men are weak and the women are crazy out here. And the women are crazy because the men are weak, and the men are weak because the women are crazy. The men expect that they have to be sensitive and kind of deferential, and they've been told this their whole lives, and they do it because they think that's going to get them laid. But it's just the opposite. My experience has been that strong, forceful action is remarkable, effective, and appropriate. And this kind of sensitive sort of, well, the car broke down, or we have a flat tire. Well, let's call AAA. What, you can't fix the tire? No, I don't want to go. I don't know how to fix it. Who's interested in that? I'm not. And the people I date aren't. So I think we can probably make an actual point on this, and we'll do one more question. We'll call it a night after this. I think the point I'm trying to make is this. Jeremy and I have these conversations quite a lot, and we can sum this up in a phrase that we both have come to agree on after many hours of discussing this. Feminists try to destroy the idea of masculinity, traditional masculinity, this idea that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. They try to destroy the idea of traditional masculinity with the understanding that if they could get rid of masculinity, they would get rid of all the problems that come with masculinity, this kind of violence and this sort of, patriarchy and stuff. And so they think that by getting rid of men, the world will become feminine. But that's not how it works. What they're really doing is, by getting rid of good men, they don't allow women to become ascendant. Getting rid of good men and breeding goodness and strength out of men only means that bad men will take over. These 7th century savages that we see in Benghazi, who pulled those people out of that embassy horizontally and left horizontal bloody fingerprints on the posts, are not people who can be reasoned with, and they're not people who are going to be shamed into behaving themselves. These are not people who can be romanced into anything. They treat their women like property. They throw them in a house and they lock the key, and they're never allowed to leave, and they keep them in a sack because that's how insecure they are. So if women actually think that by eliminating good strength, Jimmy Stewart and Gary Cooper, if you think you can get rid of Jimmy Stewart and Gary Cooper and live in a world where women rule, you will have another thing coming. Because what you will find is, if you feminize men to the point where men can't be strong and good, then bad men will take what they want in every meaning of that word. And that is not something that you want or we want. We are biologically designed, most of us, most men who are, you have this is interesting actually too, because you have an inclination biologically towards manhood. You have the hormone structure, you have a certain amount of courage and reflexes, but it is not something that happens by default. This has to be taught you by your father or by a father figure. I had a largely absent father, but I had excellent father figures and older brother types. And they taught me things, and I would just do something, and they'd say, I was 13, and this was a friend of mine named Phil, who was 10 years older than me, who was really my older brother. Phil, I wouldn't be here without Phil. Phil put most of the goodness that I have into me, certainly put most of the strength that I have into me. And I was working at the planetarium, and I would do something stupid, just stupid, destructive or dumb, or throw garbage on the floor, trivial stuff that boys do. And he would say to me, "Why did you do that?" I said, "Why did I do what?" He said, "Why'd you throw that on the floor?" I said, "I don't know." "You don't know?" "Mm-hmm." "You don't know that it's inappropriate to do that and throw that on the floor? You don't know that there's a garbage can for that, and if you throw stuff on the floor, it's going to look like a garbage can out here? You didn't know that?" "Yeah, I knew it." "Well, then why'd you do it?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" "I guess I did it because I was..." "Well, don't do that." "Okay." So I didn't. You have to put that into people. And I think you have to put it into men. Because I don't think... I had some experience lately dealing with a single mom, which I've never had before. And I mean real recently. And I know when I'm at Target or out in public and I see children having a temper tantrum, and I see single moms trying to reason with them, it is an instinctive reaction now, because this is not something that I rationalize. This is an emotion that wells up from deep place within me. My reaction is not to reason with a kid who's having a temper tantrum about not getting a toy. My reaction is to grab this kid by the scruff of the neck and remove them out of a public area without a further word of discussion. I throw $20 at the bill or at the checkout clerk or whatever, or just leave everything behind and take that child into a car, get that child home, make it crystal clear that this is not going to be continuing anymore. And the thing about spanking is it's very hard to come into a child who's already misbehaving and start spanking him, because you have to apply an awful lot of spanking, and it can actually, if you come to the situation too late, it's too late. But if you spank a child once or twice when they're very young, and you don't have to spank them very hard, this is my personal opinion, then you don't ever have to spank them again. I remember being spanked by my dad probably twice. And I remember prior to being spanked both times, my dad would count to 3. And on the 2 or 3 occasions where I let him get to 3, I was not happy with the consequences. So throughout my entire childhood, I could be restrained and my behavior modified by my dad by counting to 3. And most of you know this feeling. He'd say, "Don't make me count to 3," and I'm still misbehaving. 1, and there's the 1. And then he would do something to his voice. It was like the Jedi mind trick. 2. And the 2 was all you needed after that. Once you saw what happens at 3, 2 is enough. And so this idea that you're beating children to death for the rest of their lives in order to punish them is nonsense. What you're really doing is you're doing it once or twice so they know what it feels like, and then you don't have to do it after that. But it works. And when I see these children misbehaving, and what I see in these... I know this is kind of a little off topic, but I don't care. I'm going to wrap with this because I like this subject. I might even go another 15 minutes on this. What I see is I see adults trying to argue and reason with unreasonable children who have no capacity for reason. And what I've learned anecdotally and philosophically and everything else is what is happening when that child is acting up is that child is actually, if you really get down to it, that child is actually looking for the reassurance of a parent who says no. And the fact that they keep pushing the boundaries and they keep getting away with it terrifies them. So when you say to a kid, "You cannot have that toy," and they say, "I want the toy, I want the toy," and you say, "Okay, fine, you can have the toy if you're quiet," what you basically told this terrified little creature is that you are in fact running this world. And all of this scary stuff that a 9-year-old child sees, monsters under the bed, right, and shadows on the wall, you're telling a child that, okay, it's your responsibility. You're in boss. You're in charge. When you do something as simple as saying, "You will not have this." Why? Because I said so. That's it, in the car, and you're not coming back for another 2 weeks, and you've just simply taken away some other privilege of them. What you're really telling that child is, you are not running this show. I'm running the show. I'm running the show, and what I say go, which means you're not going to get that toy, so you're not going to get the toy. You're not going to this party because I said so, so you're not going to this party. But you're really telling them what they don't understand consciously, but what you're really telling them is, and when I say there's no monsters under the bed, there's no monsters under the bed. And when I say everything's going to be okay, I mean everything's going to be okay, because I mean what I say. And I say what I mean. And when you don't give them that, they go nuts. And that's why they have these constant temper tantrums, because they're looking for structure. They're looking for order, and they're looking for somebody in command, so it's not them. And by the way, I see comments in the comment section about maybe making this thing happen on Friday nights as a regular rule. That ain't going to happen. I try to keep my Friday nights for higher level activities than Stratosphere Lounge. Please don't take that personally. So what happens is you start, I was getting to the difference between men and women, the war on men and women. I see single moms struggling with this, and it's virtually impossible for them to do it, because the reason that we believe in traditional marriage and fight for it as conservatives is because we know how it works. And the real reason it works is because the nurturer doesn't have to be the disciplinarian. Sorry, it took me a second. The nurturer doesn't have to be the disciplinarian. They can be separate people. It works so much better that way. But whenever I see single moms struggling with unruly kids, I realize that the reason it's not working is because she has to be the person who spanks them and sends them to the room, and then she has to be the same person that sneaks up the stairs and say, listen, your father was right. You know your father was right. Now, you understand he's right. Yes. Here's a couple of cookies. Now, don't tell your dad I told you this. We love you. You just don't get him mad like that, because you know he's right, right? You can't play good cop and bad cop and be the same cop. And when I see kids acting up like this, I'm not inclined to want to reason with them or to nurture them or find out what's wrong with them. I have a overwhelming desire to get that two voice in, and I feel no sympathy or compunction for that kid whatsoever. I think Bill Cosby actually, it was brilliant, man. I think Bill Cosby really summed it up when he said, listen, talking to his kids, right, who were acting up, said, listen, I brought you into this world and I could take you right out of it. I could make another one look just like you. That's kind of where I go with this thing. So when you have this ongoing war against men and things like Title IX, where you basically say you must allocate the same budget to women's football as you do to men's football, and if 300 boys show up for men's football and 3 girls show up for women's football, they must be equal, it's absurd. And when you criticize men for being men, and when you feminize behavior among children, and when your role models are all sensitive and caring and cooperative, and no one's trying to take the lead, and there's no individuals, and everything's, you're going to get the consequences. And speaking as a person I see every now and then in the comment sections, why do you live in California? I live in California. Why do you live in California, where all the madness is, right? Where all the craziness is, the liberals and the feminism and stuff. I live in California because I grew up in Florida, and once you set foot into California, you will never live anywhere else after you've lived in 100-degree temperatures, 100-degree humidity, 100% humidity, and mosquitoes. When you walk outside the first time, and it's 78 degrees in the daytime, and at night it goes down to a brisk 65, and the humidity's 40%, and the entire ocean is an air conditioner, and there are no bugs, and there's mountains. It's very hard to leave that. The main reason I'm here is because it's where the fight is. So that's why I'm here, and I don't know. I think this is very clear, and I think that if you want to talk about dating, a half-strong man in Los Angeles has it's a turkey shoot. It's fish in a barrel, because they don't know what to do. Women out here don't know what to do. Women don't know what to do when you get a door for them, or they don't know what to do when you walk on the street side of the sidewalk for them. And here's what's funny, kids. Here's what's funny, young men. You walk on the street side of a sidewalk. You walk with a woman out of a building, and you turn to the left, let's say, and you're on the left, and the woman's on the right, and the street's on the right. You just slowly, without saying anything, you get on the other side of that. You get on the street side of that. You don't have to explain to them what you're doing, and they don't have to tell you that they're aware of what you're doing. But when you do that, they know it. And And if they know what you're doing is you're going to take the spray of water or you're going to take the onrushing car. And that's why you're doing it. Don't say a word, just do it. And if they call you on it, why'd you do that? Why'd you do what? Why'd you walk on the street side of the road? Then I say, this is where the car crash is likely to come from. And frankly, I want to have you to land on. If I'm going to get hit, I want to have something soft to cushion my fall. And then you just keep a straight face, keep on walking. They'll know what that's all about. And the rarer that gets, the more powerful it gets. And you can't go wrong with something like that. Because they want it and you want it. And when you think about this whole white knight thing, too much of a white knight is actually kind of a beta quality. It's glad handing and trying to do good, but courage and courtesy and putting yourself just on the dangerous side of the street is something that both parties understand, because the only thing worse than a damsel in a tower who's not being rescued is a knight on a horse with a lance and nothing to do. That's the saddest figure there is, It's such a good relationship, this traditional human relationship. This idea that men are stronger, faster, not necessarily smarter, but certainly more capable of logic and certainly more capable of disengaging the emotion engine during emergencies. Stronger and faster and braver in certain ways. In terms of physical courage, in terms of guys coming at you with guns, men are much braver. But in terms of what a woman will do when she's defending her children, I don't know if there's any kind of bravery that matches that. That's a selflessness that goes beyond almost anything we can imagine. But it's such a nice balance. And we die younger than women do, and we're supposed to. You'd think we'd live longer because we're simpler. Our bodies are simpler, and you'd think we'd live longer, but we don't. We burn ourselves out faster, and that's appropriate, I think. And by the way, it's a nice little button for the end of the evening. If you want to really get an insight into men and women, go to my friend Sam Clemens and see if you can find online a couple of essays he did. He did 2 of them, called The Diary of Adam and Eve. And he talks about Adam's diary when Eve first comes into the garden and how strange and odd she is, and Eve's diary talking about Adam and how strange and odd he is. And it's so unbelievably beautiful, the way that Sam Clemens nails those differences and how fair he is. How fair he is, I think, to both parties, and it's just a beautiful thing. And the final line of it is Eve dives first, and Adam is standing at the grave of Eve, and Adam says, "Wherever she was, that's where Eden was." He's an amazing guy, and I miss him, and I wish he'd come back. And I'm never going to get a chance to talk to him, at least not here. Anyway, look at the time. We've been doing 1 hour and 51 minutes of Stratosphere Lounge, episode 17. We'll be back on Wednesday next week if I can. Let me hang on a minute while I bring up my calendar. Make sure I don't. Oh, wait a minute. I may have an obligation next one. I do. I should do this in advance. Next Wednesday night, I'm going to be at an event with Condoleezza Rice. So we'll try and make it next Tuesday or Thursday, probably next Tuesday. It will certainly be next Tuesday or Thursday. I hate missing these things. And as I said before, I just want you to know that this is my lowest priority, but it's not a low priority. I love doing them, and I like getting them if I can. It's just that if I have a paying event or a speaking event or something like that, I just have to do it. And sometimes I just don't have time, but I love doing them. And this is number 17 in the can. So as usual, we'll close by saying what I always say. Thank you very much for your support and financial support, your emotional support, your intellectual support, all of it. I don't answer very many things on my Facebook page, but I read every single one of them, and I try to answer what I can. I think maybe we'll do next time is we'll do another theme night. I really enjoyed that science fiction theme night. I could do another science fiction theme night. So I'll tell you what, why don't we think about that during the week, and we'll figure out what theme night we're going to do next. Maybe do a couple theme nights and get a little more focus on these questions. If I didn't get to your question again, I apologize, and especially apologize to people who've submitted the same question time and time again. But do the best I can here. It's coming up on almost 8 o'clock Pacific time. It's time to go to bed for you folks back east, and we'll put this up as soon as we have it uploaded to YouTube. Is it over? It is over. Thanks very much for joining me. This is the Stratosphere Lounge. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.